Good afternoon, colleagues. It's actually nighttime where I am now. I hope that you have been enjoying the conference so far. It is my pleasure to join you today at the NELTA Virtual International Conference. And I would like to thank the organizing committee for the invite to participate in the conference. This is my first virtual conference in 2020. I have got two conferences in the USA canceled earlier this year because of the COVID-19 situation. And we really don't know how soon we can travel again and go to conferences again. So having a platform like this conference for us to share teaching ideas and to meet up is a really wonderful idea. So thank you very much. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk about teaching pragmatics in the second language classroom. This is an area that I have been working on for the last 15 years or so. Pragmatics is the appropriate language used in social contexts. It is not a new area to language teacher. However, if we ask teachers whether they teach pragmatics in the classroom, the answer may surprise us. Now, research has shown that whereas teachers teach grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, and all the four language skills, they rarely teach pragmatics, or at least not in a systematic and principled manner. And the main reason is probably because they do not receive training in how to teach pragmatics during their initial teacher education program, as well as during their continuing professional development courses. So they may not be fully aware of to actively incorporate pragmatics focused instruction in your daily teaching. Better. Okay. Right. So my presentation is built around 4 questions. What is pragmatics and why does it matter in language teaching? How can we teach pragmatics in the classroom? And how can we encourage students to continue to learn pragmatics beyond the classroom? I hope to leave some time at the end for further discussion and Q&A reflections. Okay. Right. So let me start with an example of pragmatics. Now, I'd like to invite you to do a small activity with me. Here is an example of an email written by a student to his professor. The student is an English as a second language learner, and the professor is a native speaking teacher, right? The example is taken from a study on student faculty email communication conducted by Consciousnessraising in 2016. So I'll pause the slide. I pause here for you to just read the email, and then we're going to discuss the question on the right-hand side of the slide, right? Okay, so have you done? Right, I have 2 questions. The first question is, what impression do you think the email might leave on the professor? And the second question is, based on the email, what conclusion can you draw about the student's language competence? Does anyone would like to, anyone would like to share your answers with the conference?
DNG, could you please unmute?
Yes, anyone can raise hand and
Friends, yeah, they can, yes, they raise hands.
Or and you can type.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so would you like me to share the findings of the study with you? Okay, then let's just do that. So in this study, Consciousnessraising sent the email to 24 English-speaking lecturers for evaluation. And those are the comments from the lecturer, from the lecturers. And look at the adjectives that they use to describe the email sender. You can see that the evaluation is not at all positive, right? The main problems that the lecturer had found with this email is, as they said, right? Although the student explained why they missed the lecture, there is no apology or no recognition that this request is additional work for the lecturer. The student does not seem to give any consideration for the lecturer's time and seems to assume that the lecturer is obliged to do what the student requested them to do. And finally, the email is too casual, given the context of communication. So if we look at the social status, right, between the lecturers, the professor, and the student, we can see that the professor holds a higher social status. And although they have known each other in the capacity of their institutional roles as professor and student, they're not family and they're not friends, right? The professor is also not obliged to re-explain the assignment because perhaps he or she may already have explained it in the lecture and the student missed that lecture. So instead of making a demand on the lecturer, the student should have asked more nicely. So in other words, the email is not considered appropriate given the student-professor relationships and the nature of the request. And that's why it is evaluated negatively by the lecturer. So this example has shown us that effective communication requires more than just the knowledge of words and language use. It also requires the ability to appropriately express your ideas, thoughts, feelings, and intentions to other people, and to accurately interpret those expressed by them as well. Now, in the past, the learning of a foreign and second language was merely concerned with mastering grammatical competence, whereas pragmatic competence is totally neglected. But with the arrival of communicative language teaching, it became a widely accepted idea that learning a language involves more than developing grammatical competence. Not only do learners need to learn how to put words into meaningful sentences using grammatical structures and precise vocabulary, they also need to know how to use language appropriately for the social context in which they communicate. That is, they need to know what to say and what not to say to specific audience in specific contexts, and to be able to understand what messages other people are conveying to them, the tone, the attitude in the communication. Doing otherwise may lead to miscommunication and in many cases may even damage the social relationships. Now, it is quite challenging even for native speakers of a language to smoothly navigate social interaction within his or her own cultural groups. This is because what is considered appropriate language use is very fluid, depending on a number of factors, such as the speaker's gender, age, occupation, social class, individual identity, the dynamics of their relationships, the specific features of the context of interaction as well. So you can imagine how daunting it might be for second language learners, right, to figure out the rules of appropriate communication in intercultural contexts, where different cultural values and communicative styles may clash at times. And because cross-cultural skills are considered essential for effective communication in the globalized world we live in today, it is very crucial for our learners to develop these skills in order to prepare to cross borders as global citizens. Now, the ability to use language appropriately for purpose, for audience, for context and culture that we have just now seen is called pragmatic competence in language teaching. Pragmatics in second language classroom is concerned with how second language learners achieve communicative goals and attend to interpersonal aspects of communication at the same time. For example, how to express your opinions, your agreement, your disagreement without offending your peers. How to make a polite request when buying a train ticket. How to make a complaint about a faulty good and make sure that you get the refund without jeopardizing your future transaction with the shop. How to give advice and recommendations to your peers without sounding arrogant and as if you know all. So in order to do so, second language learners need to acquire two types of distinct but interrelated knowledge. Knowledge of the language forms or grammatical structures for expressing their communicative intents. For example, knowing that we can use the structure can you and could you to make requests. The second kind of knowledge that they need to know is social cultural knowledge, or knowledge of social rules like cultural norms, politeness, and taboo that govern language use. So that means they need to know what kind of language use is considered appropriate or inappropriate in a given speaker-hearer relationship and in a specific context of communication and culture. For example, what is an acceptable way to make a request of an authority figure in a given culture? What is an acceptable way to respond to an offer of food or drink or express your disagreement in a specific culture? The two kinds of knowledge are closely connected, as we can see that our social cultural knowledge is reflected in our choice of language forms in communication. So when communicating in a second language, we tend to carry over these two types of knowledge from our first language. However, not everything that applies in our first language and culture may also apply to the second language. For example, whereas asking personal questions is considered a socially appropriate way to get to know your conversational partner in the Vietnamese culture, it may be a violation of social norms in other cultures. This is because different cultures operate on different principles of politeness. Whereas some cultures give more weight to personal space and privacy, other cultures may value solidarity, intimacy, and closeness. In cultures where social hierarchy is emphasized, politeness is expressed mainly by means of title, dress forms, honorifics. Whereas in cultures where individual rights are emphasized, politeness means giving options, giving freedom of choice, and not imposing one's idea on another. And politeness is often expressed through the use of hedges and tentative language, such as indirectness. So because of this variation, a great challenge for many second language learners when communicating across culture is to achieve the intended communicative effect. They may lack the cross-cultural awareness to accurately judge what is appropriate to say or not to say, or how to say it appropriately to someone from a different culture in a particular social setting. And as a result, they may say things in a grammatically correct manner, but still convey the wrong message and offend their interlocutors. So, in order to become effective use of English as a language of intercultural communication, learners need to develop the ability to make appropriate linguistic choice based on who they communicate with, where the interaction takes place, and what the interaction is about, as well as an understanding of the consequences of using one particular language form or expression over another. In general, second language pragmatic knowledge may not be learned effectively without explicit teaching. Although some pragmatic rules may be learned naturally, acquired naturally, it can take several years for this to happen. Other rules may just be too subtle for students to notice or too complex for them to understand if they are not guided adequately. Study abroad research, for example, has shown that learners do not always gain better pragmatic knowledge of the target language upon returning home. By contrast, explicit instruction has been shown to produce positive impact on the learner's pragmatic skills. So it should be integrated more into English language teaching curriculum in order to raise learners' awareness of and attention towards appropriate ways of using the target language. Right, so we have talked about what pragmatic is and why pragmatic is important in language teaching. Let's move on to the next question. How can we teach pragmatics in the classroom? Now, much work in pragmatics instruction has drawn on second language acquisition theories and principles. For example, according to the noticing hypothesis, in order for learners to learn pragmatics, they need to receive relevant inputs and notice the target form in the input and understand its function in social contexts. In other words, they need to notice and understand the relationship between language forms and the functions that this form perform in specific context of communication. Now, noticing is the precondition for understanding. So teachers should draw the learner's attention to the input as the first step in teaching pragmatics. So input is very important. However, input alone is not sufficient. According to skills acquisition theories, learners also need opportunities to put their knowledge to use. That means they need to have opportunities for output production as well, because this can help to develop fluency. So classroom instruction should aim at providing learners with opportunities for not only noticing and processing in order to understand pragmatic input, but also opportunities for sustained output practice. So input, output. And finally, learning pragmatics also requires opportunities for receiving not only corrective feedback from teachers, but also opportunities for engaging in self-evaluation, through which learners can develop awareness of their own communicative styles and the possible consequences of their choice of language. Now, there's three aspects of pragmatics teaching: input, output, evaluation. But because of time, I'm going to focus only on classroom activities for drawing learners' attention to pragmatic input and activities that get learners to practice output production in the next slides. Okay. Right, so input. There are various ways in which the teacher can draw students' attention to pragmatic information. First, the teacher may give direct explanations. Direct explanation of pragmatic rules involves providing information regarding when and for what purpose it is appropriate to say something or how to say something appropriately in a particular context. It focuses on the nuances and their meaning in context. This kind of teaching makes use of meta-language, that is, language to talk about language, right? And it's usually done in teacher-fronted teaching, but can also be accompanied by handouts for students to take home. So in the slide, you can see an example of what I call direct explanation. In this mini lecture, the teacher is trying to give an explanation about how to write a status appropriate email request to the professor in the university setting. And the example in the box here shows that the teacher's explanation why making a request can be difficult. So I'll pause a bit here for you to read the example, and then I'm going to talk about this.
Dr. Min, sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt you. Actually, the screen has not been displayed yet. I have got many comments here. Personally, they are calling in my messenger.
Oh, sorry. What is the problem?
Can you reshare?
Okay. You cannot see the
No, actually, I have seen it, but there are few
Uh-huh.
participants.
I can see.
They are saying
I can
Cannot
see.
see. Oh,
you can
okay.
see. All of you are seeing? Can you all see? Is it visible?
Should I
Okay, it's
share?
visible.
Okay.
Yes, dear sir, we can see. There is no problem. There is no problem.
Thank you.
Yes.
Maybe some of them are using mobile, maybe, so it takes time to download. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Oh,
Thank
I
you.
see.
Sorry, Min. Okay.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So the example is, if you look at all the highlighted, colored phrases, right, in the example in the box. Now, these are examples of meta language, right? Typically used in pragmatics focus lesson. So the teachers who wish to incorporate pragmatics in their teaching need to get familiarized with those terms, right? Those meta language terms, so that they can talk about pragmatics more effectively. Okay, so I move on to the next part. So besides direct explanation, the teacher can also use consciousness-raising activities to prompt students to study language sample and work out rules for themselves with support from the teacher. Now, consciousness-raising activities in pragmatics teaching are quite similar to those that are used in grammar teaching, right? A consciousness-raising activity, which you can see later, usually consists of several samples of language data that we want our students to explore, and a set of guiding questions to guide them to analyze the data and to discover rules. Depending on the student's needs, a consciousness-raising activity may focus primarily on either language form or linguistic focus, or social and cultural norms. So on the slide here, you can see those consciousness-raising activities with a mainly linguistic focus. For example, we can get the student to study a conversation, an authentic conversation between speakers from different cultures, for example, and then get them to identify the various expressions that speakers employ to initiate or to change topics. We can also get them to study conversations and then compare conversational openings and closing by speakers of different varieties of English. Or we can get them to identify words or phrases that speakers use to make their conversations go smoothly. We can also get them to identify grammatical forms that speakers use to soften the tone of a face-threatening message, such as disagreement, complaint, request, criticism, and so on. So when speakers want to express those meanings, what else do they say in order to make them sound nicer, right? Or we can also get them to identify the various expressions that speakers use to communicate their intents, such as requesting, advising, criticizing, and so on. So what kind of expression do they use when they want to express those meanings? Or students can also be guided to identify the various discourse moves that speakers use to support their message. For example, before they make a request, they usually need to check their conversational partner's availability to hear the message. For example, do you have a minute, or could we have a talk, right? Before they proceed with their request, or justify the purpose of the message and building rapport with the hearer. And here are examples of consciousness-raising activities with mainly social and cultural norms. So we can get the student to analyze contextual factors. For example, who are the participants? What is the setting? Where is the conversation taking place? And what are they talking about? What topic are they talking about? And also analyzing how these factors can affect speakers' choice of language forms to express their message in various communicative situations. We can also ask students to compare speakers' perceptions of politeness in different cultures. And this could be a very fun activity to do. Because as I said before, different cultures operate on different principles of politeness. And that affects how we speak, how we communicate with one another. Identifying appropriateness level of various expressions speakers use to perform a verbal act, such as writing an email request, expressing disagreement, and so on. An example would be in Vietnamese language. When we express a request, we usually use an imperative structure, like do this and do that. And we soften the tone of the request by using appropriate address terms or honorifics or politeness marker, please. However, these expressions may not be accepted in English because they sound too imposing, right, for the hearer. So getting students to identify various ways in which people from different cultures perform the same verbal act can actually help raise their intercultural awareness. We might also get the student to analyze and compare speakers' preference for politeness devices in different cultures. So in certain cultures, we express politeness by showing friendliness, closeness, whereas in other cultures, politeness may be expressed more subtly, via, for example, indirectness. Or comparing social cultural norms governing speech behavior in different cultures could also be a very good activity for raising learners' awareness of social cultural norms underlying language use. I'm going to give you an example. All right. So very often we can say that a consciousness-raising task may be designed in a way that direct learners' attention to both linguistic form and social cultural norms. And here is an example of such an activity. So in this lesson, the lesson focuses on writing email requests to professors. And this is a lesson that I use with a group of Vietnamese teachers of English in Vietnam. Now, in the activity described here, the learners are required to study 2 sample emails and then compare them, right? One email is written by an American student and the other one by an international student to their lecturers. So basically, students are given the samples and they are asked to read the email carefully. And after that, right, the learners are guided to compare the 2 emails, to analyze the 2 emails in terms of the organizational structures. Okay, so the questions, they're given the question, the guiding question to analyze the email. Like, how did the student address his or her teacher? So this one is concerned with the opening move of the email. And they're also guided to analyze the language the choice of language forms, as well as the effect of the language forms, right, on the teacher. So they are supposed to answer questions such as, what request forms did the student use? How direct was the request? How did the student support his or her message? And how did the student close the email? Which email sounded more formal and why? And which email would you prefer to receive if you were the professors and why? So you can see that the questions focus on a range of issues, from language forms to politeness, right? For example, formality, register, directness, and address terms, as well as discourse level issues like opening and closing an email. So by answering the questions, the learners are encouraged to notice not only specific discourse moves and language forms, but also degrees of, as I said, directness, formality, politeness involved as well. And a follow-up activity from this one could be using the questions that we can see here as a springboard to lead the class discussion of social cultural dimensions in making requests in English and in the learner's first language. And the teacher can raise issues such as cultural identity and cultural variations in making requests. Right, so that is about input. What about output practice? Now, output practice provides learners opportunity to put what they learn into use. So that can help them consolidate their knowledge and develop pragmatic fluency. So output practice is a very important component of pragmatics instruction. Output practice activities can be varied, ranging from those that require maximal teacher's assistance and guidance in using the new language items, that is guided practice, to those that require less assistance, right? That is communicative practice. So let's talk about guided practice first. Now, the aim of guided practice, right, is to assist students to master new aspects of language so that they will finally be able to produce the language effortlessly on their own. So the emphasis of the guided practice activities is on accuracy, right, and appropriate language use. That is the ability to map forms onto meaning and context accurately. And to achieve this goal, the teacher should provide a range of activities which focus not only on form, but also on functional and contextual meaning. So in this example, I let you read a bit here. For example, the students are asked to rewrite the direct request into more softened forms. And then when the student finished, the teacher can also give feedback to ensure that the student master different ways of making requests sound more polite, right? So I'll pause a bit here for you to read the example. Okay. Another guided practice activity is to give students an opportunity to write a role play based on hypothetical scenarios and then act it out. Now, for low-level students, we may want to give them prompts to guide them in writing the script. For example, you were sick and missed an important class last week. Your friend attended the class and took careful notes. Now, you want to ask your friend, to help you with the homework. Work in pairs to write the dialogue and then role play it. So students get into pairs A and B, and then they have to write their own lines. And you give them prompts. For example, A, you need to check if B is busy. So A should write something like, are you busy at the moment? B, tell him or her that you're not doing anything. No, I'm not doing anything at the moment. And then A, ask him or her to help you. And then B, refuse and give a reason. A, try to persuade him or her. B, agree reluctantly. And A, thank him or her. So for low-level students, those prompts can be very helpful. For high-level students, because they can construct the script without the prompts, right? So we can just give them a scenario without any prompts and ask them to write the script. And then based on the script, just act it out. So getting students to plan and write down what they will say in conversation, like in this activity, is a very useful building block, right, for learning conversation skills, and may subsequently lead to unprepared speech production in the communicative practice stage. Okay. Right. So this is an example. Oh, sorry. This is an example of communicative practice. Communicative practice provides students opportunities to use language more freely as compared to guided practice with minimal teacher's assistance. And the focus of this kind of practice is fluency development. So to facilitate fluency development, activities should be designed in such a way that promotes meaningful communication and at the same time ensures that the new language occurs naturally and frequently within the context of previous experience. So communicative activities can also be various. And one of the most common ones that I'm sure that you know is role plays. Role plays are loved by both students and teachers, right? Now, in role plays, students act out together a hypothetical situation. So this can be, the follow-up activity from the guided practice activity that we saw in the previous slide. In role plays, two students are assigned different roles, and the role play cards should give details of physical and non-physical context, as well as the speaker's role relationships. So, in other words, give the student as many details as possible in order to enable them to imagine themselves, in the situation so that they can carry out the conversation more effectively. So an example here, students who are going to play role A, get role A card. You are Susan, you work in a busy office. You have a new colleague called Allison. And Allison just started working in the office a month ago and is the same age as you. So very detailed, right? Your name, age, your conversational partner's name and age, and relationship as well. So you are co-workers. You and Allison are working together on the same project, but Allison is a disorganized person, right? So Allison's personality characteristics, and usually does not keep documents properly. Today, you and Allison had to spend the whole morning looking for an important document, but could not find it. You felt upset about this. So you and Allison are alone in the office. What would you say to Allison? Start your conversation, right? So this is the card for role A. Role B, you are Allison. You work in a busy office. You just started your job there a month ago. Susan is your team member and it's the same age as you. You are both working on the same project and you do not have a good habit of keeping documents properly. Today, you and Susan spent a whole morning looking for an important document, but could not find it. She seemed annoyed about this. Listen to what she says and respond as you would in real life. So we can see that the descriptions of the situation is very detailed. And the role plays here is eliciting criticism, right? Or complaints. Another activity, another communicative activity is situational writing. Situational writing is an activity where students write a short response to a hypothetical situation. For example, you are a member of a book club. You receive an email from the club saying that from the next month, you will not be able to host book discussion group meetings because of a budget cut. All the already scheduled meetings will be canceled too. Write an email to the president of the club to express your feelings and opinions. So again, this kind of situation elicit complaint, right? I don't know whether you are familiar with the British Council APTIS proficiency test. This is one of their writing task, right? Writing task 4 that they use to test students' proficiency skills. Group discussion is another communicative activity that is very useful. An example is getting students to discuss a controversial topics such as should capital punishment be abolished in your country? So this is very useful for practicing expressing opinions, agreement, and disagreement. And finally, problem-solving activities. This activity requires students to work collaboratively to solve a problem together. And in reaching a solution that is agreed upon by everyone, students need to use language effectively for a variety of communicative functions, such as suggesting, making recommendation, advice, giving justification, evaluating, negotiating, and so on. And they also need to employ important conversational management skills, such as displaying attentive listening, shifting emphasis within a topic, and moving in and out of a topic as well. So an example of a problem-solving activity is in the box here, and I'll pause a bit for you to read it. All right, thank you. So just let's move on. Right, so we have talked about classroom activities that focus on input noticing and analysis, as well as output practice, right? Let's talk about out-of-class activities. Now, why are out-of-class activities important? No matter how much content we as teachers want to teach, our teaching content is always constrained by contextual factors, right? Such as the lack of suitable materials or limited curricular time frame. And all of these are beyond our control. So due to those constraints, classroom instruction may not be able to cover, okay, all the pragmatic skills that students need in real life communication. So it is important to encourage them to continue to obtain learning opportunities outside the classroom for their own benefits and to develop as self-directed learners as well. Because we know that the learning of good language learners is not constrained to a classroom, but is lifelong and autonomous. And there are several extracurricular activities that students can be encouraged, right, to carry out in order to obtain pragmatic input and practice and opportunities for output practice as well. For example, as you can see, interviewing people of other cultures about specific pragmatic language use and or cultural norms. So students may go to the places of interest where they can meet up with a lot of tourists or international visitors, right? And then maybe approach them, interview them about their cultures. Observing and taking notes of how expert speakers carry out a verbal act, for example, requesting, opening a conversation, closing a conversation, changing topics. So watching movies, for example, or finding authentic conversations, right? And then take notes, analyzing and take notes of the features of the conversations. Paying attention to what they say, how they say it, in terms of directness, formality, how they use address terms and tones, their body language, as well as the context in which they use the language forms. For example, physical settings, the role relationship between the speakers. Students may also want to read self-access material and take notes of those as well. Sorry, I just moved this one. Okay, and when they watch movies, they might also pay attention to how people open, close, and manage a conversation or carry out a speech function. And they can take notes of what the speakers say, how they say it, and in what context they say it. And then they may want to try out what they have learned and observe with, a fellow student or an expert speaker and take notes of how the conversation goes. All right. What is the time? All right, very good. So we have 5 more minutes, just in time. Sorry. All right, so we have come to the end of the presentation, and I would like to conclude my presentation with some reflection question, right, for us as language teachers. So after this presentation, what do you think about the role of pragmatics in language teaching, right? How important do you think it is to teach appropriate language use in your classroom, and why do you believe so? Maybe think about the English textbooks that you have been using so far. What aspect of language do they focus on? Phonology, syntax, semantics, pragmatics, and so on. How well do they help develop learners' ability to communicate across languages and cultures? Taking into account your learners' goals and age and proficiency levels, what can you do or what will you do to help them effectively learn how to communicate and interpret proper meaning across languages and cultures? And I would like to share with you some useful teachers' resources if you wish to explore further how to incorporate pragmatics teaching into your classroom pedagogy. So one of the books is written by myself and my colleague in Vietnam, okay, and the other ones, they're all very famous resources. For example, the Pragmatics Teaching SpeechX book and Pragmatics Teaching Natural Conversations are very popular. They're produced by the TESOL classroom practice series. Workplace Talk in Action is also a very good ESO resource to teach communication in the workplace, right? And these are the references. The book Teaching Pragmatics is actually free. It's available online. I can send you the references later if you would like the slide. Just let me know, right? And with that, I would like to say thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you, Dr. Minh, for the wonderful presentation. And now the floor is open for the participants. If you have any queries, please you can ask the questions. If you have queries, please put your query.
I hope it makes sense.
Okay. Okay, you can unmute, I believe. Anyone has any question, you can raise your hand. I can also unmute you.
Oh, okay. I've seen a questions here. Do pragmatics communicative activities share features? So that's a very good question. I guess in a way they do, right? Because communicative activities also engage students in meaningful interactions. through which they also need to take on their pragmatic knowledge and pragmatic skills, as well as conversation management skills as well. But pragmatics activities do not include only communicative activities, right? They also include consciousness raising activities, or some, control kind of practice, which I cannot say fall under the category of communicative practice. So I hope that I have answered the question.